This is Covering the Spread, part of the FanDuel Podcast Network.
Week number 9, the NFL has a combination of a lot of really fun games combined with a lot of evolving situations, whether it be quarterback changes, shifting roles, or running back, whatever it may be. And both those things, good games and evolving situations, are fantastic for player prop betting. Today, we're going to talk to JJ Zachariason, pick his brain on his favorite player props across week number 9 to get you ready for what should be a fun Sunday in the NFL. This is Covering the Spread right here on the FanDuel Podcast Network and FanDuel Research. My name is Jim Sonis. I am a managing editor of digital media for FanDuel Research. Joined here, as mentioned, by JJ Zachariason. Check him out on Twitter at LateRoundQB. Find his work at LateRound.com and the Late Round Fantasy Football Podcast. JJ, fun week of football coming up. How you doing today?
I'm good. Good game last night, all things considered, with the Steelers and Titans. It was, most Thursday night games are just kind of ugly, and it was a fairly clean game overall. It was entertaining. I know it was lower scoring and teams, both teams couldn't really convert, but they were at least moving the ball down the field. And I got to say, Jim, Will Levis looks fun, very, very fun. I don't want to say it out loud, but Josh Allen kind of fun.
That was always kind of the profile of him is he could be a guy who has physical traits despite being kind of erratic. Right. And that's a fun profile because it can mold into some, if it does hit, it can hit in a fun way. Right. I think the issue with Levis is always that he's older. So you can't make the Allen comp directly, but the physical stuff is there. Right. My gripe with last night's games, I needed a half point more, JJ, because I pushed on 36. So I would have liked one more point because I thought the over was in play there, in large part because Will Levis is volatile in a good way. Yeah. Where he's going to chuck it deep, and long balls are better for overs. So I needed a half point to get the over, but a push is better than a loss. So I guess I probably shouldn't complain that much.
Yeah. I mean, look, I will say this with the Allen thing. One of the reasons why I brought that up is because that one play where he was sacked and he sort of just threw the ball, it looked like it squirted out and he just kind of tucked it behind. It reminded me so much of the Josh Allen. He just
chaos Josh Allen.
Remember the Texans playoff game, right? Whenever he had that lateral out of nowhere. And I think that the reason why I and many others have that just general vibe is that it feels like both of those players just get on a football field and don't really overthink it, and they're just playing football. As stupid and simple as that sounds and non-analytical, it's just they go out there and they just do what feels natural to them as opposed to overthinking things.
And with Levis, I think that it's a situation where everyone should probably want him to be good, regardless of what you thought of him coming out. I didn't like him coming out, but I want him to be good because we're kind of starved for good quarterback play right now.
Yeah, we need it.
If we can get a guy who is at least fun, I'm not requiring to be amazing, just fun and chaotic. Chaos Josh Allen was the most fun quarterback in football.
Yes.
He's a little bit less fun now that he's good. It's a little bit disappointing, but I want more chaos and I want more good quarterbacks. And so I'm rooting for Levis to at least give us that.
Yeah, totally agree.
We're going to dive into the player prop market here for week number 9 in just 1 second. And later on, I'll talk the NASCAR Cup Series championship race in Phoenix to get you ready for the final race of the year. But first, a reminder to make sure you're subscribed to Covering the Spread wherever you get your podcasts. Coming up later on today, Tom Vecchio will be on with Primetime Tom. That'll be up tomorrow morning on the Covering the Spread podcast feed and on FanDuel TV Plus. He's previewing Bills and Bengals, Josh Allen versus Joe Burrow in that game. So full breakdown of props in that game. Check out Primetime Tom with Tom Vecchio on this podcast feed tomorrow morning or on the FanDuel TV Plus app. You can also find our college football breakdown and our full NFL preview with Dr. Ed Fang right here in the same feed. And if you want some Breeders' Cup coverage, we talked to Dubs Anderson of FanDuel TV and TVG earlier on this week, all here in the FanDuel TV Plus app, FanDuel YouTube page, and the Covering the Spread podcast feed. Now, JJ, we get a banger of a matchup to open things up on Sunday morning. So you wake up Sunday morning, you turn on Dolphins Chiefs. Not a lot of better ways to spend the day. I want to talk about that game specifically because it's a pretty fun game for player props. When you look at that game, JJ, any value stand out to you?
Yeah, look, Jim, I took many years of German in high school and a semester in college. So it will be a Guten Morgen, as they say over in Germany with that game. So I think that, the way that I like to approach these kinds of questions is sort of just giving you a feel of what I see sort of going down in the game. If you look at Tua first, Tua's had 2 bad games this year statistically. One was against Buffalo, one was against Philly. And I think that even just looking at those games, he just performed the worst that he's performed all year. Those are also the only 2 games where he's faced a top half pressure rate team in the league, right? You look at Kansas City, they look really good in sack rate. They're getting to the quarterback, but their pressure rate's actually not been that good this season. And I think that a lot of people might assume that they're going to be able to get to Tua because the sack rate's good. I'm not as convinced because the pressure rate is not nearly as good as what their sack rate shows, which might mean some regression or just might mean that they're really, really efficient at getting to the quarterback. But the pressure rate piece is not there to the same degree as what we saw against Buffalo and Philly. So I'm actually okay with looking at the passing attack from Miami and thinking that they could be fine enough. The Chiefs run a lot of zone. They run zone at the 6th highest rate in the league. Tyreek Hill is by far the best zone wide receiver in football. He has a yards per route run against zone, and this is among like higher sampled players. He has the highest yards per route run against zone this year at 4.9, which is absolutely absurd. Against man, that's 3.4. So there is a difference between zone and man. So, Tyreek Hill, his number's high, of course. So, I'm not necessarily like jumping for joy to go over 92.5 yards, but I do think that there's a chance that he goes over the 92.5 yards given the amount of zone that Kansas City plays. Both teams have been below average against the run this year, according to rushing yards over expected, or, you can look at expected points per rush, expected points allowed per rush. So I do think that we could see Pacheco, Raheem Mostert, those guys getting a little bit more involved. But Jim, I think the one prop that I probably like the most is Patrick Mahomes going over 24.5 rushing yards. He's been running the ball a decent bit this year. We've talked about this many times on this show, maybe not this year, but at least last year when getting into the playoffs and stuff. But when you get a big matchup like this, we often see quarterbacks get a little bit more aggressive, put their body on the line a little bit more, and we could see more rush attempts as a result. But if you look at this line of 24.5 rushing yards, Mahomes has gotten over this mark in 6 of 8 games this year. In one of those games where he didn't, it was last week, he had 20 rushing yards. So I think that of all of the props that I saw, that Mahomes over mark is the one that I like the most.
And it's been weird too, because I didn't expect that to happen.
Right.
You were talking about the playoff stuff, and like, it's not high leverage games. My hypothesis for it was, and because I've noticed this too, is it because they're put in bad situations more often this year because the receivers aren't as good? Because it seems like the times he's most likely to run is 3rd and 13. And he picks it up every time. It's like the most lethal 3rd and 13 play as a Patrick Mahomes scramble. I kind of landed on that as my hypothesis. Is that kind of your working theory too for why Mahomes is running more this year?
Yeah, and look, you can look at certain metrics that say that the Chiefs wide receivers have actually been good when you look at next gen stats like separation, separation at target. The problem with those kinds of numbers, and I'm basically saying that the wide receivers are not good. But the problem with those numbers is that that's on a target, and Patrick Mahomes is a good quarterback, so he's going to target these wide receivers when they're open, right?
Right.
And so I wouldn't look into that kind of stuff as being super, super meaningful in this case. I think you're right though. Like I think that this offense right now lacks playmakers, lacks reliability in the passing game, and so that's going to force a guy like Mahomes to do what he can to pick up the first down. I know that we're sort of on narrative street right now talking about this and assuming that quarterbacks are going to run the ball a little bit more in these big matchups. I mean, you can even ignore that narrative and still take the over here, given the fact that Mahomes has hit the over in 6 of 8 games so far.
Right, exactly. And that has been playing like the Denver Broncos, stuff like that, not the Miami Dolphins. So I think that one does make a lot of sense. Okay, so Mahomes over 24.5 rushing yards where JJ is turning into that game. Now, I mentioned this week too, the other thing at play is we got a lot of situations up in the air. We got some quarterback changes. We've got changes in the backfield for teams like Carolina and stuff like that. So a lot of stuff evolving. Which situations are you targeting, JJ, to potentially find some value in props when those are posted?
Yeah, look, we talked about the Carolina backfield last week, and I think that was definitely a W, just given the fact that Chuba Hubbard was almost a bell cow for them last week. I mean, Miles Sanders had like 12 snaps or something. So I won't get into that as much. I think the quarterback moves are very intriguing this week. You have Aiden O'Connell taking over. The last time that he started a game was against the Chargers. Devontae Adams had a 34% target share in that game. So that could be something. You have Taylor Heineke taking over for Atlanta. Now, from a projection standpoint, there's maybe a slight bump in passing efficiency and effectiveness for Atlanta, but I think that people might be overstating the Heineke thing a little bit. And not only that, Minnesota's defense has played really well over the last month or so. I mean, that's the main reason why people are so bummed out about Kirk Cousins, aside from his health and his, mental state and all that stuff. We want him to recover and be all good. But the number one reason that people were frustrated is because he was playing so well, but Minnesota was playing very well. I mean, their defense was really coming together finally. And so that's part of the problem too for Heineke this week from a projection standpoint. You look at the Vikings in that same exact game, which is another reason why we might not see that much passing from Atlanta, is that they're starting Jaren Hall this week, who's a day 3 quarterback. I know that Will Levis just destroyed Atlanta's secondary, and people might be scared off because it's another rookie facing Atlanta. There's a big difference between an early second round pick, a guy who a lot of people thought had first round talent, versus someone like Jaren Hall, who admittedly I don't know a ton about. It's not like I sat here and studied Jaren Hall film all offseason, but I do think that there is enough to be a little bit concerned about this Vikings offense this week. They have had the most dropbacks in the league this season. They have the second highest pass rate. I'm anticipating that to definitely revert back to at least like a league average as opposed to where they've been at. And then there's Arizona too, which I don't think anyone really knows what's going on in Arizona at this point with Kyler Murray. But if Clayton Tune's a guy, then obvious downgrade for a lot of the guys there. And they're playing Cleveland, so it's not really a good matchup for them either. And then there's 2 backfields that I think should be highlighted here. One of them is the Houston backfield. Dameon Pierce right now, over the last 2 games, he's seen running back rush shares of 50% and 48%. That number was closer to 72% before the last 2 weeks happened. What we're seeing in their last 2 games is they were naturally starting to use Devin Singletary a little bit more. And now Dameon Pierce has a bummed ankle. He might not go this weekend. He hasn't practiced all week. We're recording this on Friday. So maybe he practices today, but he hasn't practiced all week. I think even if he goes, I would anticipate him not being 100% and maybe Devin Singletary seeing a little bit more work. And then the other backfield that I think is super intriguing is Seattle. So obviously they draft Zach Charbonnet this offseason in the second round. Kenneth Walker last week, and Kenneth Walker's been great this year, but last week he had a hurt calf. He did practice on Friday, and then he played over the weekend. He didn't have an injury designation, I don't believe. So he did play over the weekend, but Zach Charbonnet outsnapped Kenneth Walker this past week. I think the natural inclination is to say that's because Kenneth Walker was injured. But if you listen to Pete Carroll's press conferences, all he's been doing is praising Zach Charbonnet. And right after the game, he said that they wanted to get Charbonnet more involved in that offense. And that's exactly what they did. And I would say that this is a nothing burger if Charbonnet looked bad. But right, Charbonnet looks very, very, Look, Kenneth Walker's been great and he's a home run threat, but Charbonnet also looks great. And it makes me very sad that Charbonnet couldn't just find a team that he would be the lead back for, because I do think he's a very good talent. So definitely something to keep an eye on is that Charbonnet versus Walker split.
Like, it doesn't matter why Kenneth Walker wasn't getting volume there. It matters that Charbonnet was good, which means going forward, he should continue to get more. You're not going to turn down juice no matter what route it may be. So I think that, like you said, Pete Carroll is kind of just riding the hot hand, and the hot hand at that time was Charbonnet. So you're not going to go 60-40 Charbonnet now, but it'll level things out closer to where it had been previously. All right, let's take a look at some yardage bets for week number 9. JJ, where are you seeing value in the yardage department this week?
Yeah, so I have 2 bets from the same game, actually. It's another really fun game this week. It's the Bills-Bengals. So I like 2 overs from that game. The first one's T. Higgins. He was at 48.5 receiving yards. I think that's still his line over on FanDuel. The Bills defense has some critical missing pieces from the last few weeks, handful of weeks. I think the line might have risen a little
51.5 now.
Yeah. So it was 48.5 whenever I was putting this together last night. So it's clearly moved. I would still probably lean the over with a bet like this. And if you can find that 48.5 number, then that would be great too. But this bet to me is more about T. Higgins himself, as opposed to, the injuries that the Buffalo Bills defense has faced. He really hasn't been. He's had this really strange season where to start the season, he was healthy, but Joe Burrow clearly wasn't, and the Bengals offense wasn't moving the ball. And then T. Higgins gets hurt, and then Joe Burrow and company start playing a little bit better. And so we haven't really had this convergence of a healthy T. Higgins with a healthy and able Joe Burrow. We kind of had it last week, but they still limited his snap share a little bit. I know his route participation was fine and all that, but they still weren't using him all the time in 2 wide sets when they were running the ball, probably to save him a little bit and make sure that he doesn't re-injure those ribs. But he's gotten to this over at 48.5 in 2 of 4 games where he's run a normal number of routes. And 3 of those games came during the first 3 weeks of the season when the Bengals offense really wasn't performing well. Last week, he had a 19% target share. He's a good player. We already know that. And it's a game in general that could end up shooting out, on a slate where there's not like tons and tons of games that profile like this. So I do like T. Higgins this week. And then in the same game, hopefully this line hasn't changed, but Dalton Kincaid, 34.5 receiving yards over on FanDuel.
38.5. People are on you.
Man. Things have
you're on the right path.
Really slanted. This is a literal like less than 12-hour period here that we're talking. So I mean,
people are on board with you, JJ. It's a good sign.
Apparently. But regardless, if you can find the 34.5 line, totally fine, totally good. 38.5, I still think is probably okay to go over. Kincaid ran around on 76% of Josh Allen's dropbacks this past week. That was a season high, and that was without Dawson Knox. He's hit the over in each of his last 2 games. And Cincinnati, Jim, brutal against tight ends this year. I know that, I'm coming at it from a fantasy perspective. And so this is only, this isn't a total apples to apples comparison, but when you adjust how the Bengals have done in fantasy points allowed for strength of opponent, they're the top opponent for tight ends this season from that perspective. There is correlation between that and how many yards they're giving up and how poorly they are at the position. So I think this could be a Kincaid week. They've been actually pretty good against the slot, but they haven't been good against tight ends in particular. So I do think this could be a Dalton Kincaid week.
And I think the slot thing is good to mention because the other guy who benefited from the Dawson Knox injury is Khalil Shakir. Yep. His number is 33.5, but like you said, they've been good against the slot. So it's going to take away targets from Shakir. It's going to funnel more towards Dalton Kincaid. So I think that does make sense there pretty logically. So again, 38.5 for Kincaid right now, 51.5 for T. Higgins. I think that Higgins, honestly, JJ is a good guy to check out for the alt markets just because like he's volatile in a good way. So like 60 plus yards for Higgins is plus 124. You do want to be mindful that it is a big difference between 51.5 and 60 plus yards. But like, I think the way he profiles, he's well suited for that kind of market. Like 100 plus is plus 550. I think that Higgins specifically is a guy I'd want to check out those kind of things.
That's a great call. Great call.
All righty. What about touchdown props? What you see in there for this week?
Yeah, so I'm going to go with Chris Olave, anytime touchdown. And I'm not even going to say the odds at this point. This is on FanDuel. Plus 200 is what I saw last night and locked in last night.
So he's probably plus 120 now?
Yeah, he's probably at like he's probably even odds at this point.
Hey, he's 2-1 still. We're good.
Okay, good. Still 2-1. So he's seen the second most air yards in football this year before this last night. He has 26.5% target share per game. So his peripherals this season have actually been great. He should have, based on Pro Football Focus's expected touchdowns numbers, he should have 4 touchdowns based on his usage, where he's, seeing the ball down the field, et cetera. But he has 1 touchdown. Chicago's a beatable defense. The Saints have a really strong implied team total. They should be able to score points this week. So this could finally be, we saw it with Deontay Johnson last night, finally scored a touchdown. I think that this could be the week for Chris Olave. And then my other one, that I like to get weird with it a little bit on this show. I'm going to go. Get ready for this. I'm going to go. He's plus 490 on FanDuel.
Okay.
Anytime touchdown. Cade Otton.
Oh, yeah. Let's party.
Cade Otton. So he's 5th in the NFL in tight end route participation. Obviously, that's not as significant when you have Chris Godwin and Mike Evans on your team. You're going to be at best, the number 3 option. But he's seen 6 targets in each of his last 2 games. And Houston, their opponent's really interesting. They're first in adjusted tight end target share allowed. So what that means is when teams enter a game against Houston, they're targeting the tight end position at a much higher rate than they typically target the tight end position. He's been on the field, running a lot of routes, seeing a little bit more volume. Plus 490. Let's do it. Let's ride.
You got your Chris Godwin touchdown a couple weeks ago. Now we got to go to the other buck. And honestly, JJ, I like this game a lot. The Texans-Bucks game, like both passing offenses, despite their flaws, have been decently efficient so far this year once you adjust for opponent. Like the Bucks are doing kind of fluky ways, I would say, but like it's two decently fun offenses. This game is indoors. Neither defense is great against the pass. So sign me up in general. But Cade Otton, I actually need him in a super flex league this week, tight end premium league, because I have Sam Laporta on bye. So selfishly would love to see some Cade Otton. I'm very on board with that at plus 490.
Love it. Yeah, another guy in that game, for the record, that I thought about was Tank Dell at plus 260. Because I too think that game is pretty interesting.
And with Dell, they've been giving him a lot of like red zone rushing attempts, which is fun. It's not like it's not a Debo comp. That's always if a receiver gets a rush attempt, they are Debo. It's not that. It's more like Isaiah McKenzie, where like McKenzie back in the day of the Bills gets more touches inside the red zone. I think they're kind of doing that with Tank Dell. He's obviously better than Isaiah McKenzie, but like I think they're kind of doing the same thing. So I'm on board with that personally as well. That is JJ Zachariason. Check him out on Twitter at Late Round QB. Find his work at lateround.com and on the Late Round Fantasy Football Podcast. JJ, thank you as always for joining us here today. Good luck to you in week 9. We'll talk to you once again next week.
Thanks, Jim.
All righty. Big thank you once again to JJ Zachariason. Again, find him on Twitter at Late Round QB. We're going to talk some NASCAR Cup Series championship race here in just 1 second. But first, score early this NFL season with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 money line bet. That's $150 if your team wins. If you've been thinking about joining FanDuel, there is no better time to get in on the action. The app is so easy to use. There's a wide range of betting options, including spreads, player props, totals, and more. So visit FanDuel and kick off the NFL season. FanDuel, official partner of the NFL. Must be 21 plus and present in select states. FanDuel is offering online sports wagering in Kansas under an agreement with Kansas Star Casino LLC. First online real money wager only. $5 pregame moneyline wager required. $10 first deposit required. Bonus issued as non-withdrawable bonus bets that expire 7 days after receipt. See terms at sportsbook.fanduel.com. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER or visit fanduel.com/RG in Colorado, Iowa, Michigan, New Jersey, Ohio, Pennsylvania, Illinois, Kentucky, Tennessee, and Virginia. Call 1-800-NEXT-STEP or text NEXT-STEP to 53342 in Arizona, 1-888-789-7777, or visit ccpg.org/chat in Connecticut, 1-800-9-WITH-IT in Indiana, or visit mdgamblinghelp.org in Maryland, 1-800-GAMBLER or 1-877-770-STOP in Louisiana, 1-800-522-4700, visit ksgamblinghelp.com in Kansas, 1-800-GAMBLER.net in West Virginia, 1-800-522-4700 in Wyoming. Hope is here. Visit gamblinghelplinema.org or call 800-327-5050 for 24/7 support. And in New York, call 1-877-8-HOPE-NY or text HOPE-NY. Final race of the NASCAR Cup Series season is this weekend. They are in Phoenix, and it'll settle the championship with 4 drivers still left standing. Those drivers are Kyle Larson, Ryan Blaney, William Byron, and Christopher Bell. And if you don't know the dynamics of the NASCAR championship race, there are still 36 cars in the field, but only those 4 can still win the championship. And ever since the Cup Series moved to a winner-take-all format, a driver in the Championship 4 has won every single year. And sportsbooks know that, which is why if you're looking at the screen here on FanDuel TV Plus or FanDuel YouTube page, you can see that all of the Championship 4 are plus 450 to win the race or shorter. And my model can't get to that. My model can't account for motivation, so I'm not going to be able to bet outrights in this race because I can't bet the non-championship guys. Don't want to bet the championship guys either. So I'm going to avoid that market overall for this week. But I do still like getting exposure to the Championship 4 just via a different market. And you can actually find this over on FanDuel. It's group number 1. Group number 1 is the 4 championship drivers. And it has their odds in there, and whoever wins this group wins the championship. So it's basically just a different way to bet who will win the championship. And I think that Christopher Bell is pretty enticing at 4-1. In the championship market, he's 3-1. And so you're getting a pretty big discount here, 25% implied versus 20% implied. So big discount here for basically the exact same bet. And I think that 400 is good enough to get me to bet it on Bell. Bell has always been fantastic on these short, flat tracks. Back when he was in the Xfinity Series, he dominated at tracks like this. Has done so in the Cup Series as well. Got a win in Martinsville last year. He can definitely run this track type very well. Now, that's not to say that Bell's the favorite. My model actually likes Ryan Blaney in that department. I took Blaney earlier on this week at plus 280 to win the championship. So in the championship market earlier on this week, FanDuel has him plus 260, which is a thinner margin. So I can't get there. I think that if you can get Blaney at plus 280 to win the championship, I take that instead. But with Bell at 4-1 in this market, and with Hendrick Motorsports really struggling recently on the short flat tracks, I think there's value. If you look at the first 3 short flat tracks, Hendrick Motorsports won all 3 of them. The most recent 3, they have only 2 combined top 10s and 1 top 5, both those by Kyle Larson. But that also means William Byron has had no top 10s in that span, really struggled last week in Martinsville as well. So I think there's value in betting, kind of fading Hendrick Motorsports by taking a look at Blaney, taking a look at Bell. If you can get Blaney plus 280 or longer, I'm in. But at plus 400, I think Bell is the best value for this week. So for me, FanDuel Sportsbook group bet number 1, I like Bell plus 400 to win Sunday's race and thus the championship in Phoenix. Outside of that, though, there are 2 top 10 bets that I like, and I'm not actively doing this as like a hedge against my fade of Hendrick Motorsports in the championship, but it does work that way. So I'm not going to say no to it. But the 2 bets I like are both Hendrick cars, and it's the 2 non-championship cars. That is Chase Elliott at plus 150 and Alex Bowman at plus 450. Now, if I run my model straight up, again, not accounting for motivation, I have Elliott 52.7% to finish inside the top 10. His implied odds are 40%. But my sims aren't going to account for the championship element. And I don't know how to put that in my model. So the way I'm working around it is running my model a second time where I lock in the championship 4 to the top 10. If I just assume they're all in the top 10 and then run it again, I want to see what the top 10 numbers are for these other guys to make sure it's actually a value when it pops up as being a potential value. Now, it will undersell these guys because it's not 100% chance that all 4 in the championship 4 are inside the top 10. In fact, last year in this race, Chase Elliott was in the championship 4, finished like 28th. So it's not a guarantee they're all up there. Basically, it's like a worst case scenario. What are the odds this guy finishes inside the top 10? And for Elliott, it's at 44.5%, even when I lock in those 4 guys to the top 10. So 44.5% if I assume the worst case scenario, and that's still above his implied mark of 40%. So even when I take things to the extreme, Elliott is still a value. So at plus 150, I think he makes a lot of sense, and I will take Chase in that market. As mentioned, Alex Bowman is the other one. He's plus 450 right now. Another Hendrick Motorsports guy. Top 10 odds for Bowman when I run the model straight are 34.7%. When I lock in the championship 4, he's at 28.8%. So it's a reduction, but it's still well above his implied odds of 18.2%. In fact, 10 percentage points above that. So he's easily the biggest value in the field right now for me. This has not been a great track for Bowman historically. It's actually with that, it's still not been a great track, but the model knows that. It knows that it's not Bowman's best track, and it still shows value on him at plus 450. He did finish top 10 here back in the spring. I think we should side with the model here and buy into him. Alex Bowman plus 450 for a top 10, Chase Elliott plus 150 for a top 10, and Christopher Bell plus 400 in Group 1. The 3 bets I like for the Cup Series this week. Don't see any championship markets up right now for FanDuel Sportsbook for the Xfinity Series and the Truck Series. I have taken, I took Cole Custer plus 325 in the Xfinity Series, if you can find that. And I also took, I was looking for Corey Heim. I show value on him at plus 150 or longer to win the championship, not the race, which is what I have up here, but to win the championship. I show value plus 150 or longer. I'd probably want that closer to like 165 or so to actually bet it. But if you get Heim plus 165, Custer at plus 325 was pretty enticing. I think I have him shorter than 3-1. So I think both those pretty interesting for me. Not up at FanDuel right now, but in case they do go up later on, I like Heim plus 165 or longer, Custer 3-1 or longer. I'll have a betting guide up on numberFire on FanDuel Research later on today that'll show the actual number I have for Custer, Nemechek, Mayer, and Allgaier in the Xfinity Series. So make sure you check that out if you want the actual numbers on those guys. But I think Heim's the one most likely to be a value. Plus 165 or longer, I'd take that. But again, Custer, the guy I have my eye on most heavily in the Xfinity Series. That is all that we have here for today on Covering the Spread. Big thank you once again to our guest, JJ Zachariason, for joining us here today to break down his thoughts on player props across week number 9. Follow JJ on Twitter at LateRoundQB. As mentioned, later on tomorrow, coming up, Tom Vecchio preview Bills and Bengals from a player prop betting perspective. That's right here on the Covering the Spread podcast feed and FanDuel TV Plus. We've got the NFL full preview, college football preview, Breeders' Cup preview, all right here in the same feed. So find that on the Covering the Spread podcast feed, FanDuel YouTube page, and FanDuel TV Plus. If you got any questions for me, I am on Twitter at Jim Sonis. You can find me on Threads at Jim.Sonis. You can also follow FanDuel Research on Twitter at FanDuel Research. I want to thank you all for tuning in for today. Have a fantastic weekend. We'll talk to you once again on Monday. This has been Covering the Spread right here on the FanDuel Podcast Network.